How does the Fed and the staff of the Fed incorporate the potential policies into action? And you were chairman of the Fed in the transition from George W. Bush to Obama, which is kind of a change in government. And so a similar idea there. We've heard Powell. Anything else you want to add in terms of that? Is there anything you will be thinking about?
Well, yes. There are different kinds of governments in the world. I just did a review of the Bank of England, and I got to see how they do their forecasting at the Bank of England. And they have a parliamentary system where whatever the government says is going to be the budget typically becomes the budget. And so the forecasters at the Bank of England know pretty well what the budget is going to look like, and that's what they incorporate in their forecasts. Now, in the United States, it's true we may have a undivided government. But normally in the United States, there's a lot of negotiation and discussion and delay before policies get enacted. And so what the Fed does is they have professionals, staff, who have been working with the fiscal policy and other kinds of policy for many, many years. And they basically make their best guess based on what they read, what they hear, about what they think policy is going to look like, because they just simply can't know in advance exactly, what the Congress will approve. And I think that'll be even true if both houses of Congress are Republican. So it is a difficult task, but it is important because clearly fiscal policy in particular does have the potential to move growth and employment pretty significantly, and the Fed has to take that into account.
Taking a step back, it's quite impressive what the Fed has accomplished. They brought inflation down significantly from the elevated levels that we saw in 21 and 22, and they might have possibly engineered a soft landing in the U.S. economy. So, Dr. Bernanke, is it time for Mr. Powell and his team to do a victory lap, or are there still kind of risks lurking in the horizon?
Well, I don't advocate victory laps. Also, I so rarely make a good prediction that I think I'll talk about this one. About 18 months ago, Olivier Blanchard, a French economist, and I wrote a paper that argued that the inflation we just saw, not only in the United States, but in many other countries, was largely supply-side driven. It was driven by oil prices, by food prices, by supply chains problems, and the like. And because it was supply-side driven and those supply-side factors diminished over time, our expectation was that we would be able to get inflation back to target without the same kind of deep recession that we saw in the 1980s, for example. And that seems to be what's happening. And that's not to take credit away from the Fed. The Fed did a nice job of keeping inflation expectations well anchored at 2%, and by keeping consumption spending from getting too hot and adding to the inflation problem. So putting that all together, I do think there's quite a good chance of what is generally known as a soft landing, meaning getting rid of inflation without suffering a meaningful recession. And that, of course, would be a relatively rare event and one that I think we should be happy about. Now, that being said, there are risks to this soft landing scenario. One of them simply is that it's very hard to exactly get exactly the right path. If you ease too quickly, you risk getting inflation to come back, and we are a little bit worried that what the so-called last mile problem might be present. In other words, can we get inflation all the way back down to 2? I think we can, but you don't want to ease so quickly that you don't get there. On the other hand, we know that when the labor market cools, sometimes that's a self-perpetuating dynamic. People, as unemployment rises, people lose confidence, they lose income, and the unemployment rate continues to rise. And so it's still a tricky proposition to get from here to the soft landing that we're hoping for. And I would finally just mention that, again, the world being such a hard place to predict, many things will happen that we didn't anticipate. I think about the banking problems we had a year ago, March. We could have financial stability issues, for example. We could have cyber attacks. And I think, and now as we look around the world, and I'm sure everyone listening is quite aware, it's very, very hard to forecast how geopolitical events are going to work out. Will there be oil prices are falling? That's good for the economy. Will that continue to be the case? So I think there's a lot of uncertainty still, but as they say, so far so good. We've made a lot of progress towards getting inflation down, and the economy, if anything, continues not only not to be in a recession, but to be growing at a fairly strong pace.
One of the questions says that the Fed is sometimes described as a creature of Congress. Can the Fed maintain its independence going forward?
Well, let me first say that maintaining independence is extraordinarily important for the Fed to be effective. You look at U.S. monetary history, the big inflation of the 60s and 70s came from President Johnson pressuring Chair Martin, from President Nixon pressuring Arthur Burns, whereas the disinflation under Volcker came because Ronald Reagan was willing to let him do that. And likewise, Powell's ability to keep inflation expectations well anchored was a big help in addressing most recent inflation. So it's really important. I think that the current situation is one, of course, where the president-elect is not necessarily happy with the Fed chair and may disagree with him. Powell was very clear that he will not resign until his term ends in April 2026, and I don't think that the president has any way to fire him legally. So what the president will have to do, other than jawboning, will probably be to, over time, to try to replace Powell and other board members with people more who have views closer to that of President Trump. So we'll see how that goes. It's a slow process. I don't think that, of course, these are famous last words, but I don't think that Congress will radically change the structure of the Federal Reserve. I think they are very sensitive, first of all, to the importance to the economy of an independent central bank, but they also worry about how markets would respond. And if the markets thought that the Fed was going to become ineffective in controlling inflation, for example, that would not be a good thing for fixed income, as I think Andrew would probably agree. So that is very important. I believe the Fed will remain independent, but there will be some challenges. And we'll have to see, in particular, who the new chair is and what that person's views are in terms of trading off independent path versus accommodating the preferences of the politicians.
Andrew, I'm going to combine my last two questions into one. So one is about geopolitics, and we haven't really discussed a lot about geopolitics yet. We've got a trade war, we've got two hot wars on the ground. How do you manage portfolio risk in that context? And the separate question not related is about the stock-bond correlation. What should investors expect going forward?
So on the first point, lots of geopolitical challenges across regions. I think that a couple of things to say. First, I think this reinforces the importance of active management. If you take trade and emerging markets, say, there's going to be winners and losers across different countries. So look to position around that. The other geopolitical challenges, differential impacts across countries, look to make sure that you're being compensated adequately for the risk that you take. And I think the bottom line there is it reinforces the point I made before, that the baseline outlook looks pretty good, I would say, for the world, particularly with the US soft landing, but geopolitical risks, trade, geopolitical risks more broadly. I just think it reinforces the the idea that in this environment, the 5, 6, 7% type yield from high quality fixed income looks like a very good part of your overall asset allocation. In terms of the stock bond correlation, we had a period a couple of years ago where we saw positive correlation driven by inflation. It was a painful period in 2022 for both equities and fixed income. Since then, you have seen more of a normal pattern of negative correlation. And as inflation continues to come down towards central bank targets, across countries in 2025, I think that this should reinforce the idea of the potential for negative correlation between equities and bonds. We talked about central bank terminal rates priced into the market, 3.8% give or take for the Fed, down to 2% for the ECB. In the event of worse macro or equity market outcomes, there's plenty of room for markets to price lower terminal rates, meaning capital gains in fixed income. So in the baseline, I think the yield looks very attractive in terms of high quality fixed income. And then as a hedge to equity assets in the portfolio, I would anticipate over time that bonds can play that role in terms of negative correlations with equities, ballast for your overall portfolio allocation.
Thank you very much, Andrew. Let's wrap it up there. Let me just quick summarize for our clients attending today. U.S. fiscal deficits likely to continue. This has potential long-term implications, but over the short term, the U.S. economy is experiencing a soft landing. We expect the Fed to continue to cut rates in 2025, though possibly at a slower pace should inflation back up. With rates having repriced over the past several weeks, this could be a really great time to add to fixed income. With high quality fixed income yielding 6 to 7%, there seems to be still a lot of cash on the sidelines, and this is a good opportunity to lock in some of those yields.